Much for joining me on Times Now, Mr. Ajay Bisaria. I remember you in the Prime Minister's office during Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time as Prime Minister, and me as a young reporter. And today, reading your book, Anger Management, Troubled Diplomatic Relationship Between India and Pakistan. The title of the book itself intrigues me. Anger Management. It's always been an angry relationship, more so in the recent past, Mr. Bisaria, do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Navika. That's true. You know, in the book, we are talking of the whole sweep of the relationship for 76 years. And part of the reason why we zeroed in somewhat playfully on this title was that anger has been a motif in the relationship for the longest time, starting with partition and the killings and the anger about that, and of the wars and the terrorism and perfidy. So there is this theme of anger. And in terms of policy, there has also been a theme of it's a relationship where you can't resolve it, but you can perhaps just about manage it with smart leadership and smart diplomacy. So we just put those two metaphors together to get anger management.
Well, let me ask you. You write in your book that you never had any experience on handling Pakistan. You were never on a Pakistan desk. And you say the next morning I was sitting in Islamabad's diplomatic enclave on a chair that had been occupied by the greats like J.N. Dikshit, Satinder Lamba to Satyabrat Pal. Did you actually ever think experience would have had something to do with the Pakistan posting, or do bolts from the blue come out just like they did during your tenure?
I think, you know, the jury is out on that, whether it counts to have a lot of experience with Pakistan, or it helps to be have a fresh mind where you haven't really dealt with it and don't know its ups and downs. But, you know, I think it was somewhat unusual, though not, I wasn't the only one without too much Pakistan experience to get there. But the point was that, you know, it appears more new when you haven't dealt with the ups and downs of that relationship, because many of the ideas and developments are pretty cyclical, that you go through a bad phase, you come up to a good phase, and so on. So it was somewhat strange to be plunged into the deep end in this relationship.
Mr. Bisaria, you also talk about the fact that you probably had an indication from late General Bipin Rawat in 2019 that there would be a retaliatory attack after Pulwama. Tell us a little bit about that time, you know, first-hand experience. Pulwama, do you think this was an ISI Jaish-e-Mohammed job, or was General Bajwa on board? What did you learn at that point?
Well, you know, at that point, it was pretty much unclear what was happening, and we could only make our best assessment. But later, there was a 18-month NIA investigation into the attack, and there was a lot of evidence pieced together. So I think later it was pretty clear that Pakistan's handprints were on that job, that this was an operation which had the sanction of Pakistan's state structures. Now, it's very hard to make that judgment, at least for me, at what level it was approved, whether it was something approved by the ISI's desk looking at these operations, or by the ISI chief, or beyond him by the army chief. So these issues tend to be a little amorphous and unclear, but the fact is that Pakistan had a role to play.
At that point, you also mentioned that after the Balakot retaliation, the then Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj called you and asked you, how's the Josh? Tell us a bit about that conversation.
Yes, so that was very interesting because on the day of the Balakot attack, I had just met her a couple of days before that, and she had somewhat presumed that I would have gone back, or it may have just slipped her mind that I was in Islamabad. So she called me and she said, how's the Josh? And I said, hi, ma'am. And I immediately, we had this conversation and she exchanged a couple of other things. And I immediately called up my team in Pakistan and I said, look, the minister is very concerned about your welfare. Is everyone okay? And, passed on her good words. And the funny thing was that after an hour, her office called up and said, oh, the minister was under the impression you're back. So if you're in town, please come for this all-party meeting. And when I met her before the meeting, she said, oh, I really thought that you'd already gone back, but great you're here. We can have these conversations now.
And any details that were exchanged, because February 27th was a particularly stressful day for you as for the rest of the country, when Wing Commander, now Group Captain Abhinandan Vartman, was apprehended by the Pakistani military. I just want you to recount what really transpired. What was the messaging from India to you, and how did it really work through a breakthrough with the Pakistani authorities?
Well, right after this incident happened on the 27th, when it was clear that the pilot was in custody, there was initially a lot of confusion. There were suddenly these videos, you would recall, that emerged of him being beaten up by people who found him when he landed. And there were various videos released very deliberately by the ISPR, which showed him in custody. So after that point of time, the focus of policymakers in India changed from dealing with this crisis to dealing with the fate of an Indian citizen, an Indian soldier in Pakistan custody. And we had a sort of case study before us, which was of another pilot who had been caught in Pakistan, who had dropped down in 1999, which was Nachiketa. And we had gone through a certain process for getting his release that had taken more than a month, if I recall. And the Red Cross had been activated in getting him back. So our focus was on having these conversations about how to get the pilot back to India. But clearly, there was some reluctance within Pakistan. There were conversations on in the public domain that Pakistan should hold on to the pilot and negotiate with India and get X or Y benefits out of India. And I think at that point, India's position hardened to say that we need the pilot back, or India could escalate the situation.
And what was the reaction in Pakistan? You write in your book about Imran Khan.
The reaction, absolutely. So there were multiple things that happened. There are multiple pieces of evidence. I talk about the phone call that came from Imran Khan or on behalf of Imran Khan, that he wanted to speak to the Indian Prime Minister at midnight. Before that, there was a great deal of back-channel diplomacy or quiet diplomacy that took place with foreign diplomats, particularly the P3, the US, UK, and France. And the next day, it was quite clear that there was a conversation in Parliament, where Shah Mahmood Qureshi went to the Pakistan Parliament closed door session, and he was quoted by an MP as saying his legs were shaking, he had sweat on his brow, and he went there along with the Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, at a time when Imran Khan had promised to be there but refused to be there. So all these developments were taking place, and I try to recount each one of them to say that India's threat of force was credible and it was taken seriously in Pakistan.
Did the Prime Minister return Imran Khan's call? Did you have a word with the Prime Minister? Did the Prime Minister give you a bottom line? What was the to and fro between New Delhi and Islamabad that night?
Well, there were a lot of conversations taking place at a lot of levels, and I talk about only the ones that I was aware of. And the one that I'm aware of was the call that I got from my Pakistani counterpart, that is the Pakistani High Commissioner in India, Sohail Mahmood, who called me and said that his Prime Minister wanted to speak to mine. To which I said, and I don't disclose who I talked to, but I checked and I called back and I told him that, I don't think the Prime Minister is available, but if there's anything you want to say, please feel free to give me that message and I will convey it. And he said that he would get back, but he didn't really get back. So that's how the episode ended for me, and I was not privy to any information on whether there was a request through other channels or whether there was a conversation. But this, I think, was indicative of the fact that Pakistan was taking this threat of force seriously.
And after this particular incident, did you gain any further information on what really went through Pakistan's mind? Why did they actually decide to play ball and send back Wing Commander Abhinandan? What were the pieces that you could really join together?
Yes, so I described this in the book in terms of all the evidence that I gathered then and subsequently. And this was from the diplomats who were having the conversations with the Pakistan Foreign Office, as also from some evidence of Pakistan's internal conversations. And it was clear that Pakistan took the threat seriously, and it did not have the stomach and appetite at that point of seeing an escalation in the conflict in terms of the 9 missiles they talked about. And certainly, I think that was a motivation for the Pakistan army, perhaps, to give the advice to the political leadership as well that the pilot should be returned by India's deadline.
Mr. Bisaria, you call it Qatl ki Raat. Were there really 9 missiles trained against Pakistan? Were we actually going to initiate escalation, perhaps even a war, if our pilot was not returned? Were you really ready with your people to return back? Tell us a little bit more. Very curious about that.
Well, I think here we enter the realm of speculation. The point I make, and a point valid from an analysis point of view, is that India made a credible threat of force for an outcome, which was the return of the pilot, and that outcome was achieved. Now, your question is what would have happened had that outcome not been achieved and had the pilot not returned? Would India have executed such a threat? Hard to say. I don't have any specific information on that thinking, And I shouldn't have that information either, because, information is shared in the government on sensitive things on a need-to-know basis, so it's impossible for me to say.
Very correctly said as an Indian Foreign Service officer, but कत्ल की रात, कत्ल किसका होना था, कैसे होना था, चर्चे तो हुए होंगे.
Hey, so that is exactly a quotation from what the Prime Minister said later in a campaign speech. And that is an exact quotation. And to me, what it underlines is the seriousness of the threat that India, and the credibility of the threat of escalation that India had issued, that the Prime Minister shared with the people, that there would have been consequences if the pilot had not been returned.
Let me also ask you, what was the situation like ahead of the decision for the abrogation of Article 370, circa 2019 August? Did you have any advance knowledge? Had you been kept prepared? Were you expecting the kind of reaction that you would have been asked by Pakistan to walk from Islamabad? How was this particular decision taken by Pakistan?
Well, I had been in India a little before this incident and had a few conversations, and I had a sense of some steps of this nature that would come. And I have a feeling that Pakistan was really blindsided by this development. Pakistan did not quite have its finger on this particular outcome of the decision that the Indian Parliament took on the 5th of August. There was talk about 35A, there was a talk about why are so many troops gathering in the valley in Jammu and Kashmir, but there was no sense of the impending move to abrogate and 370 and reverse the special status. While there should have been, I feel, because it was there in the manifesto of the BJP, and it was clearly scribed there. But I think at that point, Pakistan didn't really expect it to happen. And the evidence of that is the scramble and the panic that took place between the 5th and 10th of August, which I was witness to in Pakistan, in the parliament, in the public domain.
And that scramble showed confusion, showed lack of preparation, and did it have an intent of creating a few terrorist attacks and try and make India bleed, as has been Pakistan's policy?
I think all those options would have gone through the mind of the Pakistan policymakers, but I would say that there was more confusion at that point than anything else, because there was even talk at that point of sending the Kabalis in, the tribals from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa into Kashmir to reverse this decision, and Imran Khan had to himself intervene because that didn't seem like very smart policy either to the army or the civilians. There was also talk about, I'm sure there would have been thinking about using terrorism and trying some terrorist attacks, but again they had the instructive past history of Pulwama, that it would have invited retribution and even global retribution and global trouble in terms of the FATF. So what happened was that Pakistan's options at that point were limited, and the easy option that it had was to expel the Indian High Commissioner, which it did.
And when you were called and told, did you really expect that this would happen? Were you prepared for it? or was there an element of surprise?
Well, there was an element of surprise. On the day I was called in on the 5th of August for a démarche and on what India had done in Kashmir, and I had a pushback at the meeting. I talk about that. But after that, in the public domain, the conversation was such that it became clearer that this was an option being considered. It was said in Pakistan's parliament that they should send back the Indian High Commissioner. And therefore, on that day, I was quite prepared to leave, but we didn't know whether Pakistan would ask us to close the High Commission completely and ask everyone to leave, or whether they would cut off diplomatic relations. There were multiple options, but I think they chose the least disruptive option of asking me to leave.
Mr. Bisaria, you also talk about the Kartarpur Corridor, and you talk about the fact that maybe it was a display and somehow trying to get the Sikh community to later use it to fester separatist tendencies. Did you feel this right from the beginning when Navjot Singh Sidhu arrived there, hugged the Pakistani army chief? What were your conversations with Navjot Singh Sidhu? Can you throw some light on it?
Well, when Mr. Sidhu came, the conversation certainly was on the positive aspects of it, because as you know, the background of Kartarpur is that it's been a long-standing demand or a request from India to allow that corridor for pilgrims to move up and down and go to Kartarpur Sahib. But to have this done abruptly in 2018 at the swearing in of the Pakistan Prime Minister, a message coming from the Army Chief of Pakistan to an MLA from Indian Punjab and to tell him was an odd way of conveying the message. So certainly in India's security establishment, the red flags were up that, whether that was a real offer or it's simply an offer to try and influence Sikh sentiment. But the point I make is that almost as if by miracle, by the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak, the corridor became a reality. And I think it testifies to the wisdom of India's leadership that, they decided to take into account the security concerns, deal with them, and yet let the corridor go ahead. Because don't forget that similar doubts were expressed on the security of when the Wagah-Atari border was open, that whether it's a ruse, whether there'll be a lot of undesirable elements who will pass back and forth. But the point is that the balance of advantage lay in respecting the sentiments of a lot of people in allowing this corridor to flourish, notwithstanding some of the security risks.
Then, Mr. Bisaria, about developments that have taken place since then. We're not in a very happy situation with the separatist elements both in Canada, United States, Pannoon threats and Niger. Canada seems to be blaming India. Do you think ISI has a role to play in all of this?
Well, I think it certainly does. There is a great deal of role that the ISI has had over the years in fanning the Sikh separatist sentiment, the Khalistani sentiment. And we've seen this from the 1970s. So this doesn't come as a big surprise. And, it is part of what was called the K2 strategy, the Kashmir and Khalistan strategy. So this is something where the role of Pakistan has always been clear to India's security establishment, and it has been made clear to our partners overseas for them to watch out. So I think we need to be clear-headed about where the threat comes from and to be able to deal with it, but of course the countries where such sentiment is allowed to flourish also have a huge responsibility in containing it.
Well, before I end the show, I really want to ask you this question because you write about it as well. You have strong views about the reaction that has been taken to various developments with Pakistan by the Modi administration as being different from those by previous government, especially after the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Do you think there is a distinct change in foreign policy and strategic thinking?
Certainly, and I would say that in a strategic sense, India has now developed the tools to be able to give a sub-conventional response to a sub-conventional challenge, which Pakistan has posed from the 80s, which is the proxy war in Punjab, the proxy war in Kashmir, the acts of terrorism in the 2000s, including in Mumbai. And I certainly think Mumbai deserved a much stronger response, perhaps of the nature of Balakot and Uri. But more than that, I feel that across the decades, India perhaps needed a much stronger hard power response. And if India had reacted in the 80s to proxy terrorism in Punjab, or in the 90s to one in Kashmir with hard power answers, perhaps we wouldn't have faced a lot of the bloodshed that we actually did. And I think by perfect hindsight and analysis, I think we ought to be able to make that judgment, even though we are to judge the decisions of those times against both the capacity of the state to be able to make those kind of moves.
Well, Mr. Bisaria, thank you very much for sharing with us really some of the key points of your book. And we do hope the book, as it is read more widely, gives an insight into really anger management, because diplomacy on the one side and the title of your book, Anger Management, when it comes to Pakistan, I think every Indian understands the psychology as well as the feelings behind the title of this book. Thank you very much for joining.